Ekscelencijo, dame i gospodo, dragi gosti, dobroveče i dobrodošli na svečano otvaranje programa posvećenom 100-godišnjici rođenja Ingmara Bergmana. U svoje lično ime, u ime Kinoteke, izuzetno mi je čast i zadovoljstvo što nastavljamo izuzetno uspešnu saradnju koju imamo sa ambasadom Kraljevine Švedske u Beogradu i zahvaljujući toj saradnji smo u prethodnih nekoliko godina bili u prilici da vam kontinuirano predstavljamo kako nove, tako i stare filmove koje nam dolaze iz Švedske. Verovatno ste većinu filmova koji će se naći na ovogodišnjem programu koji traje od danas pa sve do nedelje pogledali, ali ih svakako niste pogledali u ovakvom stanju, kao što su nam došli. Naime, kolege iz Švedskog filmskog instituta su napravili zaista jedan sjajan posao, radi se o izuzetnim restauracijama i imat ćete priliku da vidite ove filmove na način kao što ih je publika imala prilike da vidi u bioskopima kada su nastajali. Ovaj program se neće sastojati samo od filmskih projekcija, imat ćemo i okrugle stolove, razgovore na temu Bergmana sa našom dragom gošćom iz Švedske i takođe u ponedeljak isto jedan okrugli stol, jedna specijalna projekcija posvećena muzici u Bergmanovim filmovima. A sada bih zamolio njegovu ekscelenciju, ambasadora Kraljevine Švedske u Beogradu, gospodina Jana Lundina, da vam se obrati.
Dame i gospodo, kao zvaničnom predstavniku Švedske izuzetno mi je čast da otvorim manifestaciju koja je deo najvećeg međunarodnog jubileja jednog filmskog autora u 2018. godini. Taj jubilej se organizuje skoro u svim zemljama gdje Švedska ima i diplomatsko predstavništvo i to u čast švedskog filmskog i pozorišnog reditelja Ingmara Bergmana povodom 100-godišnjice njegovog rođenja. Ingmar Bergman je nesumnjivo bio među najpoznatijim Šveđanima na svetu, a i u Švedskoj. Bio je velikan i govoreći o velikanima i u Srbiji je prošlo vikenda izgubila Srbija je izgubila veliku Milenu Dravić i izvali jednu glumicu i velikog čoveka koja je čak i sarađivala sa švedskim filmom ponekad. Kada nas takvi ljudi napuste, na nama je da to njihovo mesto na sceni velikana sačuvamo i obeležavamo. I to važi i za Dravić i za Bergman. Organizacija 100-godišnjeg jubileja njegovog rođenja nije nužnost, nego je želja i obaveza, jer nam to daje šansu da Bergmana iznova predstavimo i novim generacijama filmskih ljubitelja. Samo na taj način oni mogu da saznaju nešto o tom švedskom reditelju koji je u svojim filmovima rušio tabue i prikazivao dušu čoveka i najogoljenijim izdanju onako kako ih on vidio. A vidio je štošta kroz oko kamere i beležio odnose između muškaraca i žena, između deteta i majke, između sestara i braće i između prijatelja. Šta su ti odnosi ako ne ono što možemo prepoznati u svima nama? Sa nama je Marit Koskinen, profesor filmskih studija koja je možda najviše od svih zaronila u autorski svet Ingmara Bergmana. Pre nego što joj predam reč da zvanično otvori ovaj festival, htio bih da se zahvalim Jugoslovenskoj kinoteci, organizaciji Eho Animatu, Milanu Jovanoviću iz G12 Hub-a i Jeleni Mili, koji su doprineli tome da ovaj festival bude festival. Sad predam reč gospođi Koskinen. Varsågod.
Okay, first of all, let me say my thanks too, of course, to Jelena, that's the way you pronounce it, Mila, Slavica Markovic-Sandic, I think, Professor Nevena Darkovic, and everyone else at the Faculty of Dramatic Arts, and of course the embassy and Ambassador Jan Lundin. Now, I do that from the bottom of my heart because I know how hard it is to organize an event such as this. So again, warm thanks to all of you for bringing me to a city where I've never been before. And I say, like Schwarzenegger, I'll be back. So, in any case, put it this way. A lot of you, I'm sure, especially the older ones of you, have seen Ingmar Bergman's films. But if you haven't, I'm still sure that you know of his name and have heard of certain titles. One of them being, of course, The Seventh Seal, given that it has that iconic, black-caped death who stands there on the shore speaking to the Max von Sydow, I think it is, right? Now, I mentioned that quite simply because it has certain ties, I think. Not only certain, it has a tie to Saraband by Bergman. In that, I think Saraband also deals with the end of life and certainly death. The literary critic Edward Said wrote a piece once called On Late Style, and that is certainly what Saraband is an example of. It's interesting that you've chosen his last film, made for television in this case, at age 85 in 2003. That's usually put at the end of let's say, a Bergman retrospective. But it's interesting perhaps to sort of turn it around and see where did Bergman come from, what ended up in his last work. Now, what Said says in his piece on Late Style is that here you can see an artist repeat, reinterpret, return, and revise his or her rather well-known territory. A bit like if you've seen Agnes Varda's last film. She's also an octogenarian, that is 80-plus person, in her last documentary, which is wonderful, called Faces, Places, where she literally drives around France and sort of revisits her films through the landscape. Now, that I think is very much what you will see in Saraband if you haven't seen it. And that is also why I think Bergman was very adamant of having Liv Ullmann as one of the characters, and the other one being Erland Josephson. Why is that? Well, it's 30 years, same characters, Marianne and Johan, as in Scenes from a Marriage, exactly 30 years earlier, which was, as you know, one of Ingmar Bergman's greatest commercial successes. But I won't talk too much about that. I'll just say that I think it's wise not to see Saraband as a sequel to Scenes from a Marriage, because it's much more than that, or rather it's a work in its own right. It's about, I think, the overwhelming presence of the past, as well as fear of the future. And what is the future for an old person? Well, death. And in this context, it's interesting, I think, the role that Liv Ullmann plays as she turns up as a wife to Johan, the elderly man in the film. I'll end with a quote by Ingmar Bergman himself that deals with this. Because if you can say that Saraband is about the fear of death, there is still a kind of a hope for rebirth after death. But in that case, no longer in the guise, in the shape of death with a black cape and in male shape, but rather death perhaps and gradual disappearance in the embrace of a woman. Or, as Bergman himself put it in a diary that he wrote while he was writing Saraband, and I quote, "I stand at a border, and I turn, listening and perhaps also seeing, toward a reality I find increasingly self-evident. That is, in knowledge of what is to come." So, at age 85, Bergman is full of fear, full of sound, full of fury, and that, if that sounds depressing, it is. It is depressing, and it is as it should be, because after all, we're talking Bergman. You're not talking about a dance and song man. So, enjoy.
We should have taken place at the cinema room, but they hired the place, and they are now still having something, but it will be finished soon. Welcome to Kinoteka, Yugoslav Archive. My name is Jelena Mila, and somebody who works or collaborates in Swedish film in relation to Serbia to Balkans. And this time I was asked from the embassy, Serbian embassy, the Swedish embassy in Serbia, Belgrade, to some kind of help this program with the Bergman. These movies are already chosen from Swedish Film Institute, and they are restored. I mean, new version of old movies, Bergman's movies. And they are now screening at the 8 o'clock next one who is coming in persona. But before that, since we have one very special and precision guest in Serbia, it's Marit Koskinen, I think it would be very great, I was thinking that it would be very great to have her in this panel, speaking with the audience in Serbia and Belgrade, as we are. And we used to have a lot of questions about Bergman, and used to have very huge interest in Bergman's movies, the work, and I think in Scandinavia or Nordic life that in huge generally. And let me introduce people who are standing now on the stage and will make this panel interesting. It's Marit Koskinen, Professor Emeritus from Swedish Stockholm Universitet. It's university, Swedish Film Studies. Then we have Miroljup Stojanovic, one who is knowing very well Bergman's work, one who is working as editor in the publishing house in addition to the Serbian Film Center Serbia. Applaud. And then we have one young director, Nikola Jutsa, who made a film, probably you know that, Vlažnost, which was Humidity, which was part of the Balkan Youth Festival for 2 years ago in Stockholm in Sweden, which we were very proud, and find out that it has some kind of trace, some kind of aesthetic that fits with the Nordic aesthetic, which is quite calm, with not too much things, and his movie has something in that spirit. One applaud to Nicola. Well, yes, since this panel will have just 50 minutes, 55 minutes, because we must count down to the cinema, We divided some kind of subjects, because if we are talking about Bergman, it could be really everything. If we are talking about film, it's huge, but then if we take Bergman, it could be much more, because Bergman is more than only movie, because he actually had interests in a lot of fields of creative life, in any kind of art. He trying to find his place somehow. And we will start this year with the subject, which is music, that we hear right now a little bit inside, so from outside, and sound. And then I will give open word to our guests from Serbia first, to give their own impressions or understanding of Bergman in the field of sound.
One of the things that we decided that we should talk from the Serbian or Balkan perspective of what Bergman is, and one of his the characteristics that he uses in treatment of the sound and music. First of all, most of his films he was very formal, the way he approached, and in a lot of his films he took some kind of musical structure as a basis for the rhythm and exchange between characters. And when you think of how it was perceived in Yugoslavia, one of the main things, I think, the stereotypical point of view towards his art was it is deeply Protestant and Lutheran in its way of thinking, and this kind of spiritualism how he treated things was something that is very typically Scandinavian, kind of a stereotype that people used to mock. Am I exaggerating with that? I'm talking about Yugoslavia, and I've known Yugoslavia only for 4 years when I was very little, but all the things that we kind of inherited and that we were taught at the film school was this very, as Jelena said, when you approach things in this kind of meditative state that is different from the Tarkovsky perspective, how the Russians did it, and how Bergman used it, they call this Scandinavian procede or whatever. So he was the leading figure of this aesthetics that is now even, that people are making, comparing IKEA furniture with Bergman style. So, okay, I'll start with this. I won't do too much.
To be honest, I'm not an expert for the use of sound in the cinema, but I have to say it's a very important question for the whole work of Bergman, because there are two lines how to use the sound in his movies. On the other side, we have the absence of sound. It means there is silence in his film structures. It's very important, and I think he's a master of that kind of cinema and making. On the other side, the way how he used the sound is very similar to Orson Welles' creative use of sound in his film structures. So I think it's very important questions for all of us. It's maybe still unknown territory. We need more discussions about that, and I think our guest in Sweden is maybe the best option to teach us about that.
What you said about Orson Welles and Bergman, both of them come from theater originally.
Exactly.
So this kind of realistic and first-person feel that you have when it's. He has very complex sound, and at the same time extremely simple. He would use only voice and clock ticking for 70% of his film, but it would go to a perfection of it. So.
And don't forget Orson Welles was the man of radio before he started movie making. Absolutely, he was famous for his radio works, first of all.
Well, about this it could be said so many things. I took some books with me here that has Bergman's quotes. Maybe we can have reason to get back to that, especially in regard to sound and music, or the absence of it, as in the title of the silence. how should I put this? This Swedish sort of approach to Ingmar Bergman's his aesthetics on this account is that, well, there's a development. Of course, there would be when you have made so many films and over such a long time. I mean, he started writing in the theater. What do you become good at then? Dialogue. I mean, if you see Scenes from a Marriage, you realize what a good dialogue craftsman he is. I mean, you really pick that up from the theater, being able to condense and get out what the gist of the matter in words. But then I think he just like Lars von Trier and the people around Dogma in the mid-90s, wanted to get back to basics, you know, get away from the conventions. And I think Bergman went through that kind of a period sometime in the with the trilogy films in the early 60s, when he had mastered the theatrical dialogue, everything that came to the craftsmanship of filmmaking. He got sick of that. He got tired of it, and he wanted to somehow start afresh from not ground zero, but reducing. The trilogy films, I don't know if you've seen them, one of them being The Silence. He called them that they are both thematically and aesthetically a reduction. That is, a reduction in the sense of throwing God out the window, all that garbage that sort of hampers human development. That was his take then. But aesthetically also a reduction in cinematic terms. Away with too much talk, back to the basics, and listen. After all, filmmaking is an audio-visual medium, and he really wanted to get back to the audio. So there's music and silences, for sure, that somehow take over the words. And here I have some nice quotes here from Bergman's workbooks while he was working on The Silence. I just give you a couple. He says, I really, once and for all, have to get away from dialogues. I'm damn tired of all these meaningless words and discussions. And then he says, in this film, and he's talking here about the film that then turned out to be The Silence. In this film, the dialogue will be entirely subservient, that is under and only an accompaniment to this, on the soundtrack. The dialogue should only be a rattle on the soundtrack without any meaning. Oh, ignoring all that talk will be delightful and cinematographic. So I mean, he had not only become a reductionist, I would say, reducing things. He had become a veritable Puritan, cinema, media Puritan, in the sense. But then I think he got hold of his senses and got back to the dialogue after that. But he was doing an experiment with his film. Alexander, all these later films, they're full of words again, they're full of dialogues. But it's an interesting time in Bergman's filmmaking, that he really tried to get back to the basics and get back to light, to sound, to ambience, and get away from what he considered then at the time to be theatrical. But of course, theater, dialogue is just a part of the films. It's a multimedia phenomenon film is anyway. So, and I think he got around to full circle back again.
And I think that people really, when we think of Bergman, we think of Bergman since Wild Strawberries, not before, because when you look at his works that he did before Wild Strawberries, it was the Svensk film industry, the typical mainstream cinema film that you would see in Sweden. It's very conventional, very, how to say, you feel this industrial thing, how he was working with it. And then after his first mental breakdown, I think that when he took off all of those elements that even some of his films look like Hollywood B movies, like his earliest films, when he cured of all those elements that we started thinking of him as, oh, this is Bergman, not
Yes, please, but don't forget the influence of golden age of Swedish silent cinema and the influence of masters of Sjöström or Moritz Stiller or something like that. I think it's very important. It is not abstractions.
Yeah, but Sjöström, well, Stoker is...
Yeah, the main actor, of course, main character in that movie.
Since we have reduced time, we're going to the next step. We managed to light picture. It goes hand in hand with cinema as art, audiovisual. How can we describe Bergman and the visual sense?
Well, there is a huge difference when he started using color. His first color film, All Those Women, it's not famous and it's a trash comedy. It's interesting, but when we look later at Cries and Whispers, that he took color to its most extreme to using red. While he was doing black and white films, he was more focused on the shadow and light. Whilst in his color films, he and Sven Nykvist were obsessed with not showing where the light comes from. The light was kind of omnipresent inside the rooms. It's very difficult to have this approach in lighting, but you can't see the direction. It's not like window-based or the candlelight. Okay, if you have a candlelight, that's another thing. But he had this thing where they were obsessed with the church lights and how everything was very unified on the skin. So I'll start with that then.
I think definitely Bergman was a master of visual style. According to some opinions, he's kind of boring director, so static, no film inventions, but of course I don't agree, because the role of pictures and the quality of his visual expression is absolutely amazing. If we try to find some influence on his visual style, there are two kinds of influence. First of all, according to Bergman, he said great influence of his work were from Japanese cinema of the Golden Age, and especially the work of his favorite film directors, Akira Kurosawa, of course, and his specific treatment of light and mise-en-scène. On the other side, one of the best directors in the whole history of world cinema, Kenji Mizoguchi. He is very important for many things in Bergman's work, not only for visual style, but from European influence. We can still find visual style of early Roberto Rossellini's work and his poetics at all. So I think it's a very important question because Bergman is not so static. Bergman is very inventive filmmaker, very visual expressive filmmaker, and I think the influence of painting is obviously too. So we can discuss all film structure in his work in general as a question of visual style first of all.
Absolutely. What was I going to say? Yes, somebody said that his early films and for sure they were made in the sort of Swedish, let's say, studio system. And this is where he learned his craft. Making film on other people's scripts before, I think 6 films before he made his first film in 1949 based on his own script. In any case, what he learned then, I guess, what you taught in the studio system on the factory floor, which was like this chiaroscuro lighting, harsh, or as he and Sven Nykvist put it somewhere, beautiful light in women's hair, and they tried to get away from that